trade routes and cultural confluence in Languedoc, an antique Greek oared wooden galley is docking at the ancient port of the coastal Greek city of Massalia. She is quite battered by the fierceness of the sea, but is still pulling through. Her hold is full of quality goods, luxury Greek jewelry, fine pottery, along with some foods not native to the region, including olives, peaches, figs, and grapevines. She unloads her cargo, takes on board some grain and metals produced in southern France, and heads to Italy and further into the eastern Mediterranean. This was one of the most common trade routes that existed in ancient Languedoc following the arrival of the Greeks in 600 BC. The main communication arteries for early humans were provided by great river basins that separated the mountain ranges of southern France, the Pyrenees, the Massif Central, and the Alps. The Rhône flows down from the north to the Mediterranean, and the Garonne flows from the foothills of the Pyrenees to the Atlantic Ocean. These rivers were traveled by boats or along tracks that followed their course. Coastal navigation along the Atlantic was also relatively safe because of the many inlets and lagoons along the coast. From the Neolithic period onward, these routes, especially those down the narrow Rhône Valley, were actively used for the two-way transfer of cultures and goods. Precious materials such as amber, along with metals and farming technology, traveled from the Danube basin into Europe and then down the Rhône. The Garonne route brought tin from Brittany and Cornwall from the Bronze Age onward. In return, the fertile lands of Languedoc supplied huge quantities of food, grain from the alluvial farms, meat from upland pastures, and oil, wine, and dried fruits from the coast. Oil and wine from Languedoc traveled down the Garonne to its mouth, and then by boat as far as the British Isles and northwestern Gaul. The arrival of the Greeks brought even more trade into the region, turning it into a trading hub that connected Gaul with Italy, Greece, and the eastern Mediterranean. Careful study of archaeological sites, including many shipwrecks, has brought all this ancient trade and communication to life. Since southern France became part of the Roman world in 121 BCE, trade intensified even further. Rome built roads renowned for their quality, many of which survived for centuries. Construction of the main roads occurred under military supervision and adhered to the highest standards. They were approximately 8 meters wide and featured long, straight alignments that were maintained across all terrains except the most mountainous ones. The foundations of the roads were made of large stones, with smaller stones or gravel forming the surface, and ditches were present on either side. The entire lengths of the major roads were provided with cylindrical milestones for every Roman mile or every Gallic league. Examples of such milestones are still preserved at some locations, for instance along the N102, approximately 5 kilometers from Alba-la-Romaine. Posting stations and inns known as mansiones, equipped for both humans and animals, were evenly spaced at intervals sufficient for 1 day of horseback travel. Some of these stations later grew into small towns, such as Sisteron and Lunelvielle, along the Via Domitia. Stone slabs or cobbles were only rarely used for the main Roman roads, while they were regularly present in towns, for example at Vaison-la-Romaine. The minor roads were 5 to 6 meters wide and usually followed natural features rather than long, straight alignments. These smaller roads, though, were still equally well constructed and sometimes even had iron slag used for their metalling, as in the Montagne Noire, which further enhanced their resistance to degradation. This extensive network of roads, however, never supplanted traditional waterborne transportation. Economic analysis, including the price edict of Diocletian from 301 CE, clearly demonstrates that river and sea transport was much cheaper compared to overland routes. Rivers and streams in the Roman world were crossed by bridges, usually pontoon bridges over the wider rivers, and sturdy stone structures with arches spanning the smaller streams. Surviving examples of authentic Roman bridges include the bridges in Viviers and Le Poussin, the Pont Flavin at Saint-Chamas, and the Pont Julien at Beaulieu. Very few authentic ports have survived from the time of the Greeks and Romans due to active use and reconstruction in later centuries. Yet the ports of Antibes, Fréjus, and Marseille can still be identified as authentic. Particularly, excavations around the viewport of Marseille revealed large warehouses that lined the harbor in antiquity, providing further evidence of active trade. Some of these remains are preserved in the Roman Docks Museum. Key players in waterborne trade, the boatmen, were revered in those days. This is witnessed by numerous funerary inscriptions dedicated to utriculari, members of boatmen's guilds, along with tombstones and funerary reliefs commemorating boat builders and captains. All these discoveries were made possible by the development of underwater archaeology, which systematically recorded and excavated many shipwrecks around the coasts of Languedoc. According to these data, merchant vessels varied in size and capacity, from those approximately 40 meters in length and capable of carrying cargoes of up to 400 tons, such as the Madrague de Gien's wreck, to smaller vessels less than 15 meters long and limited to about 20 tons, such as the Cavalier wreck. The larger vessels traveled long distances across the Mediterranean and carried wine and oil in amphorae, along with other pottery and some metals. Smaller ships and boats transported various commodities between towns. Shipwreck materials from antiquity are exhibited in many museums throughout southern France. What does all this mean for us in the context of Catharism? First, it is essential to stress that Languedoc was a vibrant part of the classical Greco-Roman civilization. As a key area of active trade, it was a crossroads of philosophical ideas and cultural influences from many parts of the classical world from the earliest times of antiquity. Second, warrior cultures were not native to the region, but were brought in by migrants from other areas, such as the Celto-Ligurians. Third, the region was fruitful and provided a more enriched diet for its inhabitants than many other places. Collectively, this paints a picture of a biologically diverse and fertile area that was incorporated into the classical world relatively smoothly and became a vital part of it due to its many industries, resources, and geographical location, which were essential for long-distance trade. These conditions predisposed the region to profound intellectual development and mutual understanding among people of many different backgrounds and cultures. Personally, I think that the foundations for Catharism in Languedoc long predated the Middle Ages. Please feel free to share your views in the comments, and thank you for your attention.